The glass slams onto the marble counter with a fizzing crack that makes your teeth ache before you even touch it. Cold beads slide down its side and pool under your palm, sticky against the polished surface where hundreds of other hands have rested before yours. The air smells of syrup and disinfectant, a strange mix of sugar and medicine that clings to your throat as if you've swallowed it already. Behind the counter, the soda jerk grins, his white apron stiff with starch, his sleeves rolled tight around muscled forearms, his hand moving so fast over bottles and levers that you wonder if he has practiced in his sleep. You lift the glass. The liquid inside is not sweet the way lemonade is sweet, not mild the way milkshakes are mild. This bite is sharp, metallic, almost electric. It snaps against your tongue and rushes to the back of your throat, setting your teeth on edge. It tastes like cherry and iron at once, like fruit syrup soaked in lightning. You cough, but no one notices. Around you the crowd hums like an engine. Young men in rolled shirt sleeves slap coins down, laughing louder than the clink of the glasses. Girls in pressed dresses sit upright on the stools, ankles crossed but eyes darting, giggling into gloved hands, as if the fizz itself has tickled them. Everywhere is motion. Boots scuff the tiled floor. Brass pumps hiss and pop. The soda jerk spins and jerks, filling glass after glass. The sound of carbonated water rushing like a river turned mechanical. Behind him the shelves glint with bottles of syrup in every colour of stained glass. Ruby cherry, golden lemon, rich chocolate. Each label promises both pleasure and cure, a taste of health disguised as indulgence. The hierarchy is unspoken yet obvious. The wealthy man in his bowler hat does not glance at the coins he tosses, ordering 2 drinks and leaving one unfinished. At the far end of the counter, a boy in patched sleeves counts his pennies before daring to nod for a single phosphate. The minister passing the doorway pauses long enough to scowl at the crowd before moving on, muttering about idleness and temptation. You sit between them all, your glass catching the lamplight, the fizzing bubbles crawling up like restless sparks. You take another sip. The burn spreads deeper, sharper, addictive in its strangeness. It is not just refreshment. It feels like you are swallowing something new, something dangerous, something born of science more than nature. And as your lips touch the rim again, you wonder, is this a harmless drink, or the beginning of a craving that will never let go? The phosphate soda did not begin as a treat. It began as medicine. In the middle of the 19th century, pharmacists experimented with new chemical compounds, chasing the promise of science, bottled in liquids and powders. Phosphoric acid, a colourless substance with a sharp, metallic tang, was praised for its supposed ability to aid digestion, sharpen the appetite, and cool fevers. In the dim light of apothecary shops, lined with glass jars and oak cabinets, the acid was stored alongside quinine, camphor, and tinctures of opium. Few imagined it would one day be mixed with syrup and sold to children as a pleasure drink. The transformation was simple, yet dramatic. When a pharmacist dripped a few drops of phosphoric acid into sweet fruit syrup and topped it with soda water, the drink came alive with bubbles and bite. The sweetness was cut, sharpened, electrified. What had once been medicinal became fashionable. The concoction still carried the aura of a tonic, something respectable, but it was also fun. To drink a phosphate soda was to taste modern chemistry, to sip from progress itself. By the 1870s, soda fountains in American drugstores had begun serving these phosphates to eager crowds. At first they were advertised with medical promises. Restores vitality, aids nervous exhaustion, sharpens the intellect, claimed signs that fluttered in store windows. Customers nodded, grateful that something so delightful could also be virtuous. But soon the medical pretense faded. The tang was too exciting, too refreshing, for the drink to remain in the realm of medicine alone. Soldiers returning from campaigns, clerks stepping off trains, women shopping on market streets, all paused at the counters of soda fountains to sip from tall glasses that fizzed with phosphoric tang. The drink spread quickly across towns and cities, its appeal fueled by both novelty and accessibility. Syrup, soda, water, and acid were cheap. Any drugstore with the proper equipment could serve one. For pharmacists, the soda fountain became both an additional source of income and a way to draw steady crowds into their shops. Still, the image of the phosphate soda remained caught between two worlds. On one side, it belonged to medicine, an offshoot of chemistry and pharmacy, carrying the residue of clinical respectability. On the other, it belonged to entertainment, a sharp kick of fizz that had little to do with healing. This tension gave the drink its power. It was both safe and daring, both tonic and temptation. By the final decades of the 19th century, phosphate sodas had become more than a passing curiosity. They were fixtures in towns from Boston to Street Louis, part of the daily rhythm of drugstore counters. Yet the question lingered in every glass. Was it health or indulgence that customers truly tasted when the fizz rose against their lips? Step inside a Victorian-era drugstore, and the first thing you notice is the sound. Glass tapping glass, spoons striking marble counters, soda water hissing through brass spigots. Beneath it all, the low hum of voices, laughter, and the shuffle of boots. The soda fountain is no longer just a side counter tucked into a pharmacist's shop. By the closing decades of the 19th century, it has become a stage, a gathering place where medicine and merriment blur into one performance. The counter itself gleams with polished marble, often imported at great expense, a surface meant to impress as much as to serve. Behind it rise tall mirrors framed in carved wood, reflecting rows of syrup bottles that glow like stained glass. Cherry red, lemon gold, chocolate brown. These colours tempt the eye, even before the flavours reach the tongue. The soda jerk in his stiff white apron works quickly, his motions practiced, his expressions both efficient and theatrical. Customers do not just buy a drink, they watch a small act of chemistry unfold before them. Fizz and foam, turning an ordinary glass into a spectacle. Families treat the soda fountain as a wholesome destination. Mothers bring children on hot afternoons. Husbands escort wives after Sunday church, all under the impression that a phosphate soda is as safe as it is fashionable. At the same time, the fountain becomes the favoured haunt of teenagers and young adults. They linger at the counters, trading gossip and glances, sipping phosphates that taste both daring and modern. For them, the drink is more than refreshment. It is a ticket to a new kind of independence, a way to belong to the current of progress, sweeping through American towns. Respectability and suspicion mix uneasily here. Ministers walk past the crowded fountains with disapproval etched on their faces, convinced that no good comes from so much idle chatter and clinking glass. Yet local newspapers publish cheerful sketches of drugstores buzzing with young life, painting the soda fountain as a symbol of vitality and civic pride. In many towns, it becomes the brightest, most modern space available, an oasis of light, colour, and taste in an otherwise grey routine. Still, not everyone feels welcome. The wealthy man in his tailored coat claims his glass without effort, tossing coins as if they mean nothing. The factory worker in patched sleeves counts carefully before ordering a single phosphate. Both stand at the same counter, but the gulf between them is as wide as the polished marble slab itself. In that shared space lies the strange magic of the soda fountain. It is democratic in ritual, yet divided in reality. By the end of the 19th century, phosphate sodas were no longer merely drinks. They were experiences, social glue binding together classes, ages, and ambitions under one roof. To sit at a soda fountain was to feel part of something larger, something modern, even if the fizz in the glass carried more uncertainty than anyone wanted to admit. The first sip is never forgotten. Cherry phosphates sting the tongue with a sweetness so sharp it borders on medicinal. Their deep red syrup, glowing in the glass like stained glass lit from within. Lemon phosphates cut even harder, sour and electric. A jolt that puckers the mouth, yet leaves you reaching for more. Chocolate phosphates arrive as curiosities, rich and creamy, but carrying that same metallic tang beneath. A strange marriage of indulgence and chemistry. Each flavor is a balancing act, syrupy comfort colliding with the acid bite that sets phosphates apart from every other drink at the counter. The choice of flavor becomes a small ritual of identity. A young woman ordering cherry signals a playful boldness. A boy daring himself with lemon proves he can withstand the sting. And the adventurous souls who choose chocolate are marked as modern, even experimental. Newspapers pick up the trend, describing phosphates as the fashionable drink of the season. Advertisements print slogans that promise not just refreshment, but progress. A phosphate is not simply a beverage. It is the taste of science, of invention, of the future bubbling up in a tall glass. For some, the sharpness is intoxicating. They claim the drink clears the head, quickens the pulse, even improves conversation. It wakes you up, one columnist writes, with a vigor no coffee can match. Others are unsettled. They complain the tang lingers too long, leaving the tongue dry and the teeth on edge. To them, phosphates taste like medicine, poorly disguised as a treat. But even they return, drawn back by the fizz, the spectacle, the social pull of the fountain itself. The flavors are as much about sight as taste. Bottles of syrup sit in neat rows behind the counter, their colors catching the glow of gas lamps in the evening. Patrons watch as the soda jerk pours, pumps and stirs, each movement deliberate. The hiss of carbonated water meeting syrup becomes as familiar as a hymn, a sound that signals belonging. To order a phosphate is to participate in a performance of modernity, as much about being seen as about quenching thirst. Every glass carries a contradiction. The fruit flavors suggest nature and sweetness, but the acid bite insists on something harder, sharper, almost industrial. This was not the drink of farm orchards or homemade kitchens. It was the drink of laboratories, drugstores, and cities glowing with electric lights. To sip it was to accept both comfort and discomfort, a mingling of sweetness and sting that mirrored the age itself. By the turn of the century, the flavors of cherry, lemon, and chocolate phosphates had become icons of the soda fountain era. They promised more than refreshment. They promised that you, too, could taste the chemical thrill of the modern world. The soda fountain becomes a magnet for the young. After school, teenagers slip through the drugstore doors, their coins clutched tight, their voices loud with laughter that carries over the hiss of the pumps. They lean against the marble counter, sipping phosphates with exaggerated bravado, as if each gulp proves they are braver, bolder, more modern than the generation before them. The fizz burns, the tang bites, and that sharpness feels like freedom. For many, a phosphate soda is the first thing they buy without permission. It is not as scandalous as beer, not as controlled as tobacco, but it has a sting that makes it feel like a rebellion in a glass. Boys order lemon phosphates to show their toughness, daring each other not to wince at the sour bite. Girls sip cherry phosphates with a practiced elegance, hiding their laughter behind gloved hands as they watch the boys sputter. Couples share straws, leaning closer than propriety allows, their whispers lost in the noise of bubbling glasses. Parents worry. Ministers thunder from pulpits that soda fountains encourage idleness, waste money, and worse, invite temptation. What begins as a drink, they warn, leads to habits of indulgence. In their sermons, the drugstore counter becomes as dangerous as the pool hall or the dance floor, another place where the young forget restraint. The more the preachers scold, the more the young flock to the fountains, savouring the thrill of defiance, disguised as refreshment. The soda jerks themselves understand the power they hold. They become minor celebrities, young men with quick hands and faster jokes, admired for the way they spin glasses, mix syrups, and command the attention of the room. Their white aprons gleam, their confidence sharp, and the crowd of teenagers watches them with admiration. To work behind the fountain is to stand at the crossroads of chemistry and popularity. Half pharmacist, half performer, class lines blur but never fully dissolve. The sons of businessmen and the daughters of factory hands may sit side by side on the stools, yet their coins carry different weight. The wealthy order seconds without pause, while the poor linger over a single glass, drawing out the fizz as long as possible. Still, in that moment, all of them are part of the same ritual, united by the sting of phosphate on their tongues. By the closing years of the 19th century, the phosphate soda has become the unofficial badge of youth. It marks the shift from childhood to independence, from obedience to rebellion. To sip one is to claim a small piece of freedom, a taste of the future, even if the adults watching from the doorway see only a generation slipping from their control. Every fizzing glass carried with it not only flavour but also suspicion. Phosphoric acid had marched into the American diet under the banner of science, yet not all agreed on what it truly did inside the body. Some physicians praised it as a tonic that sharpened the appetite, soothed indigestion, and even steadied frayed nerves. They wrote in medical journals that a phosphate soda could refresh a tired worker more effectively than tea or coffee, and far more gently than whiskey. Others were not convinced. They warned that the acid corroded enamel, inflamed the stomach lining, and left the tongue rough with repeated use. Pharmacists, perched between science and sales, were caught in the debate. On one hand, their profession gave them authority to claim that phosphates had medicinal properties. On the other, the crowded counters and laughing teenagers suggested otherwise. For many soda jerks, the acid was simply a trick of taste, an ingredient that made syrup come alive. The line between cure and indulgence grew thinner with each glass served. Articles in newspapers alternated between optimism and alarm. One week, a column would praise phosphate sodas for restoring vigour to the weary clerk. The next, a stern essay would compare them to patent medicines filled with questionable chemicals. The uncertainty only added to their allure. Customers leaned into the mystery, savouring the bite with the knowledge that it might be more than just refreshment. That ambiguity made each sip feel modern, even dangerous. A chemical marvel that ordinary generations had never known. Parents worried about children forming habits. Will this lead to stronger cravings? One editorial asked. Ministers went further, comparing the dependence on phosphates to the weakness caused by alcohol. Though exaggerated, the fear reflected a cultural unease with science invading the most ordinary rituals of daily life. If something as simple as a drink could be reshaped by chemistry, what else might follow? The medical debate revealed more about society than about the drink itself. It showed how quickly new inventions blurred the line between health and pleasure, between pharmacy and entertainment. It showed how authority was shifting, as newspapers, preachers, and scientists all tried to claim the right to interpret the fizz in a glass. The truth was elusive. Some patrons did feel invigorated, others complained of stomach pains, and many noticed no ill effects at all. By the final decades of the 19th century, the question was not settled. Was the phosphate soda a harmless indulgence, a tonic in disguise, or a subtle threat to health? No one could agree. But the uncertainty only deepened its hold. Every sip carried both promise and warning, leaving drinkers unsure whether they had chosen science's gift or its hidden curse. At the marble counters of the soda fountain, the classes of America sat side by side. On the stools, a banker's son in his pressed suit might lean an elbow too close to the seamstress's daughter in her faded dress. Both ordered cherry phosphates. Both raised their glasses at the same time. And for a fleeting moment, they shared the illusion of equality. Yet beneath the fizz and the laughter, the differences never disappeared. The wealthy treated phosphates as small luxuries, tokens of a life filled with comforts. They ordered rounds with the same ease they tossed coins to cabmen outside, sipping quickly before leaving for theatres or gentlemen's clubs. To them, the soda fountain was an extension of leisure, another glittering stop in a day already softened by privilege. For the working poor, the phosphate was something else entirely. It was a moment of escape from a day of aching muscles and soot-stained lungs. A bright fizz that dulled hunger long enough to pretend it was satisfaction. Drugstores themselves reflected these divisions. In cities like New York or Chicago, grand fountains gleamed with marble, brass fixtures, and tall mirrors, the pride of middle-class neighborhoods. In smaller towns, wooden counters and simple glassware told a plainer story. Yet the phosphates poured were no less sharp, no less thrilling. The drink was democratic in availability, but its meanings shifted with the wallet that bought it. Class prejudice lingered, even as people sipped the same glass. A woman in fine gloves might wrinkle her nose at the laughter of factory boys seated nearby. A minister might scowl at teenagers mixing freely across lines of income and background. To moralists, the soda fountain was not simply a place of idle indulgence. It was a place where the walls of society thinned, where order seemed at risk of dissolving into the fizz. And yet, that mingling was part of its power. The phosphate soda offered a ritual in which rich and poor alike could take part, each raising a glass to lips tingling with the same metallic bite. The banker's son and the seamstress's daughter could sip from the same fountain, their coins buying the same brief taste of modernity. The soda jerk, with his quick hands and practiced smile, became the unlikely equalizer, serving each glass with identical flourish. By the final years of the 19th century, phosphate sodas had become symbols of both unity and division. They showed how progress could be tasted by anyone, yet also how society clung to its boundaries, even in the most democratic of spaces. The fizzing glass at the counter was both a bridge and a wall, a reminder that modern pleasures were never entirely free of old inequalities. Not everyone lifted a glass with delight. For every crowd that laughed around the soda fountain, another group whispered warnings. Ministers declared from pulpits that the drugstore counter had become a den of temptation. They argued that phosphates wasted wages, kept young men from honest labour, and lured young women into frivolity. To moralists, the fizz was not harmless chemistry. It was indulgence, idleness, even sin. Some critics went further, claiming the acid bite itself carried danger. Pamphlets circulated that warned of ruined teeth, inflamed stomachs, and weakened nerves. A few alarmists even described phosphate soda as a subtle form of addiction, insisting that the sharp tang trained the body to crave stronger stimulants. Today, a cherry phosphate, one minister cautioned. Tomorrow, a glass of beer. The next day, a bottle of whiskey. The slippery slope seemed to start at the marble counter, a path to ruin disguised in fizz and syrup. The soda fountains became contested ground. To many parents, they were safe, even wholesome. They kept children out of taverns and offered a social space that was cleaner than saloons. To others, they were no better than gambling halls, filled with noise, gossip, and improper mingling of boys and girls. Newspapers fed both sides, running cheerful sketches of soda jerks in crisp aprons one week, then publishing stern essays about wasted youth the next. The suspicion made phosphates all the more attractive. Teenagers laughed at warnings and returned to the counter anyway, their loyalty to fizz stronger than the sermons against it. The more phosphates were scolded, the more they became symbols of rebellion, tokens of independence, in a world where every other indulgence was tightly policed. Young women, especially, found freedom in ordering their own drinks, sitting boldly at counters once dominated by men, daring to claim space in public life. Yet the critics were not entirely wrong. Some drinkers did develop a habit, not unlike the attachment to coffee or tea, where the day felt incomplete without the sting of a phosphate. Soda jerks noticed familiar faces returning again and again. Coins spent nightly for the same sharp glass. Whether it was addiction or simply routine, the sight worried the guardians of morality. To them, every fizzing glass hinted at decline. By the first years of the 20th century, phosphate sodas stood at the center of a cultural divide. To some, they were symbols of health, modernity, and progress. To others, they were proof of society's decay, indulgence wrapped in sweetness. The drink carried not only bubbles but suspicion, its fizzing surface reflecting the anxieties of an age torn between science and tradition. The fizz that once drew crowds began to fade. By the opening decades of the 20th century, the phosphate soda was losing ground to a new kind of drink. Bottled sodas, smoother and sweeter, promised the same refreshment without the sharp metallic sting. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and a host of regional rivals spread across the country, carried not by soda jerks in drugstores, but by delivery wagons and eventually factory trucks. For the first time, the ritual of refreshment could be bought in a sealed bottle, ready to drink anywhere, without the performance of the fountain. The change was not sudden, but it was steady. Where phosphate sodas demanded the presence of a fountain, a marble counter, and a skilled jerk with a steady hand, bottled sodas required nothing but a coin and a cap opener. The ease appealed to workers on the move, soldiers boarding trains, families packing picnics. The sharp bite of phosphoric acid could not compete with the dependable sweetness of caramel-coloured syrup. Progress demanded convenience, and the phosphate, once a symbol of modern chemistry, began to feel old-fashioned. Drugstores adapted. Many kept their fountains, still serving phosphates to loyal regulars, but their counters grew quieter. By the 1920s, ice cream sodas, sundaes, and malted milks had overtaken phosphates as the stars of the fountain. Children wanted chocolate syrup and whipped cream, not the metallic tang of phosphoric acid. The green fairy of Europe had fallen to scandal and prohibition. In America, the fizz of phosphate sodas slipped away quietly, drowned out by smoother flavors and shinier brands. The decline was cultural as much as commercial. The fountain had once been a temple of youth and modernity, but the rise of jazz halls, dance clubs, and motion pictures offered louder thrills. Teenagers no longer needed to rebel with phosphates when automobiles carried them into whole new worlds of freedom. What had once felt daring now felt quaint. By the middle of the 20th century, the phosphate soda had nearly vanished. A few small towns still served cherry and lemon phosphates to nostalgic customers. A few old drugstores clung to their marble counters and brass spigots, relics of another era. But the drink that had once been a symbol of chemistry, rebellion, and modern taste became a footnote in the history of soda. The fizz did not disappear entirely. Its spirit lived on in every bottle of cola, every can of flavoured soda that followed. But the phosphate itself, with its sting, its tang, its uneasy balance between medicine and indulgence, belonged to the past. Though their popularity faded, phosphate sodas never entirely vanished. In scattered towns of the American Midwest, old soda fountains continued to pour them, long after the rest of the country had forgotten. A cherry phosphate could still be ordered in certain drugstores, its syrup glowing deep red in the glass, its fizz rising like a memory. For the locals who tasted it, the drink carried more than flavour. It carried the echo of the 19th century, a time when science and spectacle were poured together at every counter. The revivalists of the late 20th century occasionally sought to bring phosphates back. Nostalgic soda shops reintroduced lemon and chocolate versions, often marketed as novelties, curiosities that connected modern customers with the forgotten past. Some reacted with fascination, savouring the sharp tang, and marveling that their great-grandparents once called this a treat. Others winced at the metallic bite, pushing the glass aside with the same suspicion that haunted the drink in its earliest days. The debate had not changed. Was it refreshing, or was it unnatural? A tonic, or a trick? Phosphate sodas became symbols rather than staples. They represented an era when the boundaries between medicine and indulgence blurred, when the pharmacy counter could double as a playground, and when young people tested their independence with a few pennies and a fizzing glass. They reminded Americans that progress often tastes strange at first, that novelty can carry both excitement and unease. Today, their ghost lingers most clearly in the ritual of soda itself. Every hiss of carbonation, every fizz in a glass, owes something to the phosphate stage. Modern colas inherited the sparkle, the spectacle, and even the acid bite, though softened and hidden behind smoother sweetness. When you lift a bottle of Coke or Pepsi, you unknowingly echo the same gesture made in countless Victorian drugstores. The phosphate may be forgotten by name, but its legacy bubbles on. For those few who still taste it, the phosphate soda is a reminder of how a drink can capture an age. It is not only syrup and acid, not only fizz and colour. It is the memory of a nation in transition, caught between tradition and progress, unsure if science would save it or spoil it. To sip one today is to raise a glass to history itself, a ghost that fizzes once more before fading back into silence. Step back from the marble counter, from the hiss of soda water and the glow of syrup bottles. What remains is not only the story of a drink, but the story of an age. The phosphate soda was never simply refreshment. It was a chemical experiment poured into glass, a taste of progress disguised as sweetness. It revealed how eager people were to trust science, even when it came with a sting, and how quickly pleasure could be wrapped in the language of medicine. The fizz carried contradictions. To parents it was harmless, even wholesome. To preachers it was temptation, proof of wasted youth. To doctors it was a tonic one day, a danger the next. To the teenagers who crowded the counters, it was none of these things. It was freedom. The right to sit shoulder to shoulder, to spend their own coins, to taste something sharp and daring that belonged only to them. In that fizz, they claimed their independence, however small. Like all crazes, phosphates faded. Bottled sodas marched into homes and picnics, smoother and easier to swallow, armed with advertising that promised joy in every cap. The phosphate could not compete, yet in fading, it left behind its ghost. Every modern soda carries echoes of its bite, its bubbles, its strange promise that chemistry could make life brighter. To remember phosphate sodas is to remember a time when the drugstore was not only a place for pills and tonics, but for flirtation, rebellion, and spectacle. It is to recall that progress has always tasted complicated, sweet on the tongue and sharp at the edges. What some saw as harmless fun, others feared as a sign of decline, and perhaps both were right. Today, only a few fountains still pour them, their fizz softer, their glow dimmer, their audience nostalgic rather than daring. But the lesson remains. Every generation invents its own drink, its own ritual, its own way of turning the ordinary into something that feels like magic. The phosphate soda was one of those moments, sharp, fleeting, unforgettable. A fizz that promised the future, even as it faded into the past.